I would like to kick off by again wishing everyone, especially the distinguished panelists, a very good morning, good evening, or meaning and welcoming all the audience. We have audience joining in from across the world. So a big thank you and a namaste from India. Now, firstly, as we've already been introduced to Professor Taniguchi to self-purpose, I would like to take this opportunity by introducing the rest of the panel members, starting with Mr. Justin Hartley. He is a Fulbright scholar, a graduate of Harvard, and is currently reading at Oxford. Justin Hartley is a pioneering academic with various interests ranging from leadership to management to international relations. He is also an international leadership coach, as well as a co-chair in the GPI Quad Forum initiative. Justin currently sits on the Center for Asia Leadership's Global Advisory Council and is the center's country head for Australia and New Zealand. Justin, interestingly, is the creator of Model Leadership Framework, and he's a coach, trainer, scholar, author, as well as a public speaker. He holds the Guinness World Record in memory. And Justin works with high caliber individuals and teams around the world in business, politics, and sports. And his expertise is sought after around the world by CEOs, presidents, prime ministers, and Olympians. We have the Tokyo Olympic coming up. So besides, he's a classmate from Harvard and a dear friend. We welcome Justin to our discussion. Moving on to welcoming Dr. Nagao. Dr. Nagao is a fellow, non-resident at the Hudson Institute in Tokyo, and is also a co-chair in the GPI Quad initiative. Dr. Nagao's research area is US, Japan, and India military stunt, including research fellow at the Institute for Future Engineering, visiting research fellow at the Research Institute for Oriental Cultures, research fellow at the Japan Forum, associate at Society of Security and Diplomatic Policy Studies, research fellow at the Security and Strategy Institute for Japan, senior fellow at the National Security Studies in Sri Lanka, and senior research fellow of the Indian Military Review. Previously, he served as a lecturer. He's worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this is one thing in common. He served in the Armed Forces of Japan as a first lieutenant. So he's also contributed the column Age of Japan-India Alliance in Nikkei Business. We welcome Dr. Nagao to our discussion. Moving on to the only lady on our panel, Melissa Conley-Tyler. We welcome you. Currently, Melissa is part of the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne and Director of Diplomacy at Asia Link. She is currently in Taiwan as a visiting fellow at the Institute of Defense and National Security Research funded by a Ministry of Foreign Affairs Taiwan Fellowship. Previously, she served as the National Executive Director of the Australian Institute of International Affairs for 13 years. And under her relationship, AIIA was recognized as one of the top think tanks across the world. She has, in 2017, she co-authored Think Tank Diplomacy, the first ever book-length discussion on the role of think tanks in modern diplomacy. Melissa has extensive experience in promoting international debate, establishing and sustaining networks among Australian and international thought leaders through track 2 dialogues involving academics, government officials, media, and business. She is a lawyer by training and a specialist in conflict resolution, including negotiation, mediation, and peace education, who worked as a program manager of the university's International Conflict Resolution Center and a senior fellow of the Melbourne Law School. We welcome Melissa to our discussion, who is representing ASEAN. Andy Konkaro likes to describe himself, interestingly, as an undercover crisis economist, a ghostwriter, an economy-wide modeler, a macroeconomics lecturer, a public policy devotee, international relations enthusiast, a tax auditor, and a transfer pricing analyst. Wow, that's quite a bit. Andy currently serves as an economist, fiscal policy analyst, and speechwriter for the Office of the Finance Minister. He previously served as a transfer pricing analyst at the Director General of Taxes. By training, he is a graduate of Cornell's MPA Economic and Financial Policy program. Just a quick tidbit, he is a classmate of Arpit. He is a lecturer in microeconomics at the Polytechnic of State Finance. Cornell University announced him as the honorary recipient of Pi Alpha Alpha Global Honor Society in 2018. Pi Alpha Alpha is an honor society based in DC, United States. Members of Pi Alpha Alpha are recognized for their outstanding scholarship, leadership, and accomplishment in public affairs and administration. We warmly welcome Mr. Andy to our discussion. With that, without much ado, we will jump straight into the basic theme which we are going to discuss Quad. And Professor Taniguchi has a framework under which we will kind of discuss in the panel. But I still want to push further by taking in perspectives from each of the Quad country partners, as well as how ASEAN is viewing this. So in that light, I would invite Melissa first to talk about, from an Australian perspective, the pertinence of the Quad grouping in contemporary global politics.
Absolutely. Well, why Quad? I mean, the first thing to say is it's about China. And so I agree completely with Taniguchi-san that, China's assertiveness has brought us together. But from the Australian perspective, it's also all about India. So we already have an alliance relationship with the US. Japan has an alliance relationship with the US. Australia and Japan already have a 2+2 and comprehensive strategic dialogue. There's nothing missing there. The missing link is India. And so Quad is a mechanism to bring India into this fold, to try to build more consensus. It's an alternative to an alliance because India would not go that far at this point. But it's a way to bring that grouping more cohesively together.
Right. So I hear you that that essentially it's about not only about China, it's about India also. Dr. Nagao, would you agree to that it is about bringing India closer to the fold? Dr. Nagao? Dr. Nagao, can you hear us?
Sorry, suddenly I missed your question. Could you please repeat that? Connection has interrupted.
Yes. So Melissa was talking about that primarily the Quad grouping is an attempt, right, to bring together India in the fold of US, Japan, and Australia, because in some way the remaining three countries are alliance partners in one way or the other. So it is about bringing India into the fold without a formal alliance. So your comments on that, Dr. Nagao?
Yeah, I agree with Melissa, because when we compare with the Indo-Pacific and the Asia-Pacific, which country did not include in the Asia-Pacific? India. When we check the Quad, same thing. Melissa already explained, but Japan and Australia, the former ally of the United States, but India is newcomer. So that is the reason why Prime Minister Abe introduced the idea of the Indo-Pacific and the Quad, because we want to cooperate with India. So I completely agree with the Melissa's opinion.
Right. So Justin, at this stage, I would want to kind of hear your views because you work with almost many colleagues across Asia, heading Center for Asia Leadership in this geography. What are your views on why Quad? Justin?
I just received a message from Justin. He's joined in with another name, so we'll have to make him the co-host again so that he can speak with us.
Lovely. So in the interim, right, I would move on to the perspectives from ASEAN. We have Andy from Indonesia. Andy, what do you think?
Can I come in
Yeah.
for half a second?
Absolutely.
I have just a question for Melissa, and if Justin joins.
Yes.
Melissa, we, at least let me speak for myself. I am a great admirer of your Prime Minister Scott Morrison. The kind of leadership that he has provided and the way he has gone about pushing back at pressure is amazing. But my question is, I agree with your approach to, or what you are saying about the outlook. But then also, the fact is that in 2008, you had Mr. Kevin Rudd. And, in democracies, leaders change. So do you see the possibility of a big change with the change of leadership in the approach of Australia, or for that matter, my question related to Ambassador Tom Bruster is that Armbruster is that there could be another leader in the US.
I don't think there's been a massive change in policy settings between Rudd and Morrison, but I agree with your general point that as leaders change, things can change. I would say that the Australian view on China is now quite bipartisan. It's one of competition heading towards an adversarial relationship. The relationship with China is a very bad one at the moment for Australia, and there's no sign of that changing dramatically. I think if in the next election there's a change of government, there might be a change of style in some ways. But I can't see many of the major policy settings changing.
Thank you.
Ambassador Armbruster, I think Ambassador Vishnu Prakash wanted your inputs also.
Yeah, I won't go down the rabbit hole of American domestic politics, but I would say that there is sort of a sleeping giant in the United States, I think, and that is the Indian diaspora. If we want to push Quad, there is quite a sizable Indian population in the United States that could make their voices heard on that and a number of other issues. And I would certainly look forward to seeing that. But I think
also in Australia.
Yeah. But I think I'm going to stay out of any other political discussions, or as I said, it's down the rabbit hole. So thank you.
Right. So, and I hope Andy is with us on the panel. It will be interesting to hear his views, especially from the ASEAN lens. Andy, are you there?
Hello, Dr. Shukla. Sure. So before I go through, so all the opinion I expressed here in this discussion, do not reflect any official stance from any institution in my country. So that's my disclaimer before I go through. So actually, I will briefly discuss several hard facts on the economic optics of the Indo-Pacific building. So if we go through the macroeconomic perspective, Indo-Pacific, or maybe Asia-Pacific, to be precise, Asia-Pacific countries captures some significant share in the global value chains of intermediate goods export, actually. So almost half of the global value chains export of intermediate goods actually comes from Asia-Pacific, actually. And we can say that practically the region is a pawn of, in my terminology, a pawn of value creations. So it's processing 40% of intermediate goods imported from the total global value chain. So that's why we shouldn't be surprised if about the fact that 90% of the trade flows in the regions are actually concentrated 40%, roughly 40%, in the Quad members minus the United States. So it's Australia, Japan and India. And roughly 40% of them is concentrated in China. And the remaining 20% is in ASEAN. So that's the constellation of trade flows actually within ASEAN, China, and the Quad, minus the United States. So what I'm talking about is about food, things that can enable people to do anything, right? So food, that is food. So I'm talking about also about automotive. So automotive spare parts ranging from motorcycles and motorcycles, and then automobile spare parts ranging from components for airplane or submarine, anything that can enable people to do anything anywhere physically, including transporting commodities or people to anywhere, concentrated in the Indo-Pacific actually. And I'm talking about also electronics component, things that can enable us to connect with each other, right now in this 5.0 kind of world, right? So of course, if we break down all those final goods, right, we can sectorally, talk about several lists of basic materials such as mining, mining like minerals, steel ore, like nickel ore, tin ore, iron ore, anything, and any kind of energy source like coal, right? Coal and then palm oil, right? So actually, 73%, if I'm not mistaken, of global coal production into 2020 is actually, under Asia Pacific. And about, if you break down 73%, 50% is China, right? And 45%, not 45%, I think 10% is India. Indonesia is 7%. Australia is around 6%, if I'm not mistaken. And while the United States, I think they're gradually declining in terms of coal production from 13% a decade earlier to only 6%. So economically speaking, actually, Asia Pacific is not just upon the value creation activities, but also energy source, let alone palm oil. Okay, so I think some people here will whisper that palm oil, coal, they are all dirty energy, but that's not the problem in here, right? So it's not the part of the discussion theme in here. So not to mention nickel ore in Indonesia. Indonesia holds the largest share of coal, nickel reserve actually, and then followed by Australia. So what I can say is, economically speaking, Indo-Pacific or Asia Pacific is not just manufacturer, but also world energy store, and also maybe a source for strategic military logistic. I think the US calls it the SNS, if I'm not mistaken. So I think with that in mind, there will be opportunities and risks exposed by the escalating tension between the Quad and maybe the growing power assertive China. So there's always an opportunity and risk with that. But I think ASEAN have just made its gestures. I think it's, in my opinion, it's a good attitude, but I think we don't have any kind of like practical strategy or things that is more like a policy approach for that. But in terms of gestures, I think that's the right attitude for now. That's in my opinion, I think.
Thank you so much, Andy, for your inputs. And actually, what you just said has given us the perfect segue to expand the discussion, because in our understanding and what Taniguchi-san was saying in the beginning, that Quad has to grow beyond, right, and the concept has to expand beyond just a security grouping. So what are the potential areas, right, through which cooperation can be expanded and Quad can be strengthened, and maybe not just as an adversarial grouping to China, maybe as something which is pan Indo-Pacific, which includes ASEAN, which maybe in a really ideal scenario have cooperation from China also. So with that, Arpit, I know that this is an area which you would love to chime in on. So inviting you to kind of your views.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Shashank. And over here, no, it's an interesting question that, what are the various things that we can do to strengthen Quad as a security grouping? And I'd go back to the researches that have been done in the area of security communities. How do security communities form? And according to our research, what we have done at Global Policy Insights, and personally the research that I've conducted, it needs 3 C's for any security community to come together. And Quad, I believe, would come together and grow much stronger by adopting these 3 C's. And the C number 1 is contact. So 2 communities should come into as much contact, as much exchange of ideas, exchange of, decision-making discussions, exchange of people, economic exchange. So that sort of a contact is absolutely the first thing that we must have in order to strengthen Quad. And this is also something that we heard Professor Taniguchi saying, that we should probably discuss our issues as Quad members on a daily basis. So that's number 1, but that's a necessary but an insufficient condition for any security community to get bolstered. The number 2 condition is a common goal. Now, we do have a common goal right now, as Melissa just mentioned, and it's, we have to be very honest in admitting this, that it's China. China is the common goal right now. But then look at history and look at the times when, any sort of an alliance or an empire or any confederation was built around a common enemy. Is gone, empires have broken away when the common enemy has gone. So instead, keeping China. So I think what is important over here is to ensure that we build positive common goals as well as we go along in the longer term. The 3rd C over here is about common identities. And here it is the tricky part, because if you look at language, if you look at civilizational or historical developments, Japan, India, Australia, and the United States, they have been moving in absolutely different directions, not antithetical, but then qualitatively different directions. So how do you build a common identity? And the answer over there lies in the fact that all of these countries are democratic countries. All of these countries are focusing on a rule-based order. And here we can bring in other ASEAN countries as well, who would want a rule-based order in the world. So the idea over here is that once you take care of all of these 3 necessary but insufficient unto themselves conditions of a common goal, a common identity, and create contact, it is only then we will be able to develop Quad as a security community in itself. Over to you, Shashank. Shashank, I don't think we can hear you. Sorry, you're on mute. Yeah.
So the travails of an online meeting. right? So very succinctly put, when you say contact, common goals, and common identity, I think we have Justin back among us. I would like to bring in Justin at this point in time to hear his views on how do we strengthen Quad. That is the discussion that we are bringing in, and Arpit just got us a framework. So your views on that, Justin.
Hello, Shashank. Thanks very much for having me, and thank you to Professors Taniguchi and Ambassadors Prakash and Armbruster for your wonderful insights. I think Quad is an initiative which is clearly evolving, and I think it's really important to think about how it can expand the benefits that it offers. And one area which I think is also potentially one we can look at is social policy and how that can be shared among countries. Let me explain what I mean. I think there are many issues that we all share, and one of those is demographic changes. Particularly Japan and the US and Australia, for example, we have a below replacement rate, a fertility rate at the moment. I think the Japan and US is about 1.7, when it's generally regarded as 2.1 is the required rate. And actually Japan might be 1.3, I think Australia is 1.7. I think India is about 2.1, which is spot on. But the point is that we have this low, below replacement fertility rate combined with an aging population. And we are aging around the world, pretty much universally in developed nations. That means that we need to restructure our welfare systems and states. These are some of the biggest budgetary items for any nation. So basically what we're looking at the moment is having, in time, not enough resources to fund the welfare of our citizens in all our countries. So the two goals that I think we need to aim for is increasing the welfare of our citizens, but also promoting economic growth. And so these sorts of initiatives can be better sustained based on current literature by looking at current welfare states and previous regimes, but also including social investment policies. And these are, rather than looking at, I suppose, repair initiatives, it's looking at progressive initiatives where we can, I guess, invest in human capital. These are relatively new policies, and I think will be ones that flourish in the future. The point that I'm making here is that the Quad can be a leader in actually sharing these policy initiatives, policy transfers, learning from each other, and that boils down to having regular communication, sharing the best practices between different governments, and strengthening the region through economic growth and prosperity of its citizens.
Thank you, Justin. The aspect about social policy, welfare, and economic growth, right, is something which is certainly applicable for all the Quad partners and possibly for Quad Plus also, which might include ASEAN. Now, I wear this cap of a skeptic. While there's been so much talk, right, that so much can happen, right, through Quad, what I see is that the priorities of each of the Quad countries are quite different, right? They are kind of sometimes at odds with each other. So in the next section, I'm going to kind of invite at this point in time Ambassador Prakash to kind of shed light on the disparities or the at certain point in times differing priorities, let me put it like that, of the Quad countries. And do you see Quad coming together in the real sense and hopefully evolve into an alliance one day? What are your views on that?
Well, thank you, Shashank. I would defer here to Dr. Taniguchi, who made a very pertinent observation to a question of mine, that Quad needs two things. One, to get into a habit of a regular dialogue, and two, let's accept it that it's a nascent organization. It has barely learned to walk, but instead of walking, it's already running. And I think it's a factor of time. The common bonds are between the Quad, among the Quad countries, are democracy, same value system, similar challenges. So I am very bullish on Quad. But if you permit me, we can pose that query to Dr. Taniguchi if he'd like to come in. We will really gain from his insights in the matter.
Taniguchi-san, your views would be...
Right. 10 years from now, we will be talking about many different things. And we will perhaps be talking about more cohesive gathering and grouping of 4 nations of these countries. At the beginning, however, we should be rather more single-mindedly focused on imminent threats that are centered not around climate change or demography, but around national security and the aggressiveness of the Chinese on many different fronts, where China wishes to become a revisionist presence in the international order. So yes, I do agree with all those observations and proposals made so far, but I think they are more like a long-term agenda rather than an immediate task that Quad, especially leaders, should look at.
And if you look at other organisations, people often talk about a Christmas tree effect. You develop an organisation and then you keep putting more and more things on the agenda, like putting more and more baubles on the Christmas tree. And we've seen this when you have effective organisations like the G20. So I think you have to be very careful about not overloading, about saying, what's the agenda that fits the interests of these 4 parties? What do they really want at the moment? Their commitment levels, their interest, and maintain momentum on that without overpromising.
So I hear you, Melissa, and I hear you, Professor Taniguchi. But let me push back what address was going on. Professor Taniguchi himself, he wouldn't expect the Australians or the Japanese to jump in, right? And similarly, if China goes and invades Taiwan, right? I don't see it have a security lens. Then and we have these constraints, right? How does it work? How do we make this right into something which actually delivers results on the ground? Because I see contradictions.
So I would say on Taiwan, for example, I'm in Taiwan at the moment, visiting fellow here, and I would actually say it would be seen as a failure of the Quad if India doesn't see a conflict in the Taiwan Strait as being relevant to it. One of the whole points of the Quad is to say that a Taiwan Strait conflict is an international problem. It's a problem for the whole Indo-Pacific. It's not just an issue for China and Taiwan to sort out. You know, we've seen in the Japan-US summits, the US-Korea summits, the Australia-Japan summit and the G7, it's all about saying that peace and security in the Taiwan Strait is an issue for the whole of the Indo-Pacific. So I think we are precisely trying to build consensus on that sort of issue. Now, whether that's boots on the ground is a whole different question, because as you've heard, so much of what's likely to happen in Taiwan, if that's the test for the Quad, and I think it might well be the test, is it might be about cyber, it might be economic, it might be a blockade. There's a whole range of things. It doesn't necessarily look like an amphibious invasion. But the point is, you would want India to be behind the other Quad members in responding appropriately to whatever tactics are used.
Can I jump in?
Excuse me,
can I jump in?
Yes, Dr.
Thank you. Yeah, in this case, we should not forget Professor Taniguchi already mentioned in the long run, Quad can work, even if the Himalaya. Because China's military expansion has a pattern, territory expansion has a pattern. Look at South China Sea. When France withdrew from Indochina, Vietnam, China took the half of the Paracel Island. And when the US withdrew from Vietnam, they took another half of the Paracel Island. When the Soviet Union decreased their number of the troops in Vietnam, they took the 6th feature of the Spratly Island. And when US withdrew from Philippines, China takes the Mischief Reef. So view from these activities, we can find one pattern when they find the power vacuum, they try to take it. They are safe. So to prevent China's activity in Taiwan against Taiwan or the Indo-China border area, what should we do? If Japan and India and US and Australia cooperate each other, China need to divide their defense budget multi-direction. This means that they cannot find the power vacuum because their military budget has divided and cannot easy to create the unbalance of the military budget. So in the long run, Quad can work to deter China's activity because we can divide their defense budget multi-direction. That is the reason when the China invade, it is not easy to deter. But if we check the effect of the long run, we can deter China by using Quad. And one more thing I want to emphasize. We do not, this is different topic, but I want to say one thing. We do not limit the Quad discussion only in the quadrilateral framework, because Quad has made by bilateral, trilateral, or more multilateral relations. US-India relation has promoted, and India imports many weapons, equipment from the United States. That is part of Quad. So even if the bilateral relation, so Quad has really moving, and Quad is very effective. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you for the spirited defense of Quad, Dr. Nagao. I actually wanted to put Ambassador Armbruster on the spot here. The thing being that Australia, Japan, and India geographically are much closer to the perceived threat of China. Now, just in the scenario, right, of what Dr. Nagao was talking about, that if something happens, right, if a conflict does break out in whatever sense of the word, right, be it cyber conflict, be it actual boots on the ground, do we actually see US kind of stand by across the 7 seas and come to the defense of its allies? Will that actually happen? Because that will be the test of Quad and many other institutions.
I certainly hope so. And I would say the advantage and the strength of democracies is that we have the best self-correcting mechanism that there is. When a government goes in the wrong direction, we vote them out. Whereas I think with authoritarian countries, they often double down on their miscalculations. And I think a good example of that is North Korea, where if China would allow North Korea to integrate into the world economy, they would find they have a trading partner, they have a neighbor on their doorstep that's stable. And so kudos to Dr. Prakash for raising Taiwan right off the bat as this very important issue. But I think that's another example of China as an article of faith determining that they should take Taiwan back. And I think that's a miscalculation. In a democracy, there'd be a healthy debate about that, and perhaps some other voices would be heard. But I think that we have to recognize our strength in all the voices we hear in a free press and in a vital democracy, and not discount that and think, oh, we have this disadvantage, we're slow, we have to deliberate. That's our strength and our advantage, and I think we have to remember that.
Thank you, Ambassador. Andy, I would like to seek your thoughts on this because ASEAN is kind of caught in a bind, in the sense that if Quad grouping strengthens, right? On one side, as you say, it's 40-40-20, as you put it, right? So where does the 20 go to make it 60, right? So meaning, where do you think ASEAN weighing in, given I tried to make it into kind of a more inclusive framework, but as Melissa said, we shouldn't probably take a Christmas tree approach. So in case it is not a Christmas tree approach, where do you see ASEAN weighing in?
Well, I think the gesture is quite clear in the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, I think. So, it's quite clear there, and about 70 decades, it's not 70 decades, it's 70 years ago, even my vice ministers at that time already said that ASEAN would be Indonesia's central, international affairs or struggles, and it's the difficulty for that struggle is still in here. Actually, the economic integration is, in my opinion, is not actually there. ASEAN is suffer from infrastructure gap right now, and human capital gap, technological gap, any gap, even development financial gap, and the Quad is there. And the way I see them is that the competing interest between the Quad, the China, and perhaps part of the higher power in this world. It makes they try to build. They really try. I mean, like practically, they really try to build a structure in the region, in the Southeast Asia region. A structure that is very important, because I think structure is very important in the Southeast Asia part of the world. And I think whether they take an attempt like an RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or maybe from the perspective of China, it's from the China's Belt Road Initiative. From the perspective of China, it's from AIIB, the infrastructure financing, and from the perspective of Japan, maybe it's from Japan's multinational enterprises quite strong in the world, right? Especially in the Southeast Asia. If we treat Southeast Asia as an input market and output market for Quad members. So I do personally think that this geopolitical and strategic game in the Indo-Pacific region is a good thing, in a way that the member countries of Quad and the other competing interests, China and maybe Russia and any other country in ASEAN, the member of ASEAN, I mean, they are getting more connected regionally, and at the same time, they gain more self-resilience, maybe through financial stability, through a program like a climate change, DRRM, and maybe another economic integration that can empower, informal economy. The high numbers of informal economy in the Southeast Asia, I think that kind of thing will enable ASEAN to participate more in the global value chains, economically speaking. And of course, for any countries in the Indo-Pacific to prepare for the rainy days, I guess. Rainy days, maybe natural disasters, or maybe another pandemic, right? The next coming pandemic, or maybe financial crisis and any other kind of disaster, or maybe warfare, right?
We hear you, Andy, and that kind of leads me to the last section that I want to discuss as part of this panel, is about Quad Plus. Now, I would like to go around, starting with Taniguchi-san, if he's still with us. Yes, he is. Around the views, there are various views around Quad Plus, and how do you think, Taniguchi-san, that Quad should involve more and more countries in its grouping? Should it or should it not? And if it should, then your views on that. Professor Taniguchi.
I think we'd rather not dilute our collective identity, and we should stick to 4 countries at the moment. But it is a gathering of like-minded democracies, especially maritime democracies. if that's the category, you should invite many others, certainly Singapore, Indonesia, and so on. But from European side, it's already some countries have indicated their willingness to be part of the Quad structure. The UK, as mentioned earlier, is sending its battle force group this year. France is following suit. And Germany is testing the ground at the moment, and perhaps Germany is also doing the same. And it's a collective voice that counts. However, Quad must build its core identity that must be around these four nations, because it is after all about Indo-Pacific. It is about how to secure the sea sphere of the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Taniguchi. I would like to now ask Ambassador Armbruster for his views on Quad Plus.
Well, and Shashank, if I can add a question for Ambassador Armbruster, if he could answer that as well, that Quad is not something that Russia would absolutely, want to entertain. It is not something that Russia would like that it fructifies. What do you think that, given the facts that we have in front of us, especially for India, when India is pivoting towards Quad and, despite many clear signals from Russia that it does not, entertain such a thought, what do you think would be the role of Russia in Quad coming up, or do you think will there be no role at all?
I think Russia will feel intimidated by Quad. Obviously, like-minded democracies heading in the same direction is something that is antithetical to Russia's current approach of really disrupting that type of thing, disrupting NATO and other security blocs. But I would get back to your point, Arpit, about a central identity. And I think Dr. Taniguchi is right that the four countries need to establish that identity and then invite observers and other participants maybe that can bolster it and can help flesh out this initiative. But there's such a long way to go. If you Google Quad right now, you get a little kid on a four-wheel motorcycle. We've got a long way to go to, I think, establish that identity and see what it's capable of doing. But I think it's getting started, and I think it's very promising. And this forum is an excellent example of that.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador. On that note, I would like to invite Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, because I know he's a big votary for Quad Plus. So want his voice, I would want to add to the discussion. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, would you weigh in? Do we have Ambassador Vishnu Prakash with us? I guess till the time, right, we get Ambassador Vishnu Prakash back. Melissa, your views on Quad Plus.
On Quad Plus. Yeah, it's interesting because in Taiwan, a lot of people do say, Quad Plus, would you let us in? Because, Taiwan would like to be part of anything whenever it gets a chance. I don't see it very much. There's a lot of institutions and bodies, and I could go through the alphabet soup of the EAS and the ADMM++ and all the rest of them that exist. I don't actually think we need lots more bodies as such. What we need is a bit more consensus among some important countries that need to see eye to eye. So from my perspective, Quad does that. It should talk to other countries, obviously, but all of those countries do already talk to other countries. So it's just one of the, what's often called the multiple geometry that now exists, that we can have lots of discussions across lots of different geometries, and that's just fine. I don't think the Quad's naturally very cohesive at all, but I think you can build cohesion. So my example of that would be something like BRICS. Now, I often ask this just as a party game. Tell me, what do the BRICS all have in common? I will ask. And people say, oh, they're emerging economies. And I ask, well, on what timescale? Or they're major economies, sorry, South Africa. Or they're anti-colonial, like Russia is anti-colonial. Okay. I mean, they came together for a really narrow thing. They wanted to improve IMF voting rights. Okay, they all had a common interest in that and they were happy to work together. But over time, they've actually developed a lot more. And a great example I saw not too long ago is the way that, you'll love this, hospital administrators in the BRICS countries now have a network where they all talk to each other, as do local government officials and all sorts of other people. They used to look for their examples to Western countries, but they've worked out that actually looking across the BRICS helps them do their job much better than always aping Western views. So you don't have to start cohesive to find something useful to do together. And I think we keep doing things until we find more and more useful things to do.
Lovely, lovely. So I'm hearing consistent voices for developing a core identity of Quad first before expanding into Quad Plus. I think Ambassador Vishnu Prakash is back with us. Ambassador, would you like to weigh in, being a votary of Quad Plus?
Thank you. And sorry for the slight 2-minute adjournment that I had to take. There were some very pressing reasons. I do see the point of a core being nurtured, built, strengthened. At the same time, for me, one country which can really contribute to the core, and to me at least, has a similar vision and outlook and stake in the region, Indo-Pacific region, is France. So in my book, France becomes a strong candidate. But with the other Quad Plus countries, if there is an issue-based exchange of views, issue-based cooperation, I think that enhances the ability of Quad to deliver. Not that, we should not make haste to expand Quad. We are at the consolidation phase, and that I agree with.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador. Bringing in Justin as the last word on this. Justin, your views on Quad Plus before we jump into a couple of audience questions, because I know we are already a couple of minutes over time.
Thanks, Shashank. I mean, I don't have a lot more to add to what our panel have said. I think it is important to understand our core and what we're actually trying to achieve with Quad, and I think we're still evolving in that respect. So until we're really certain about that and we have things up and running properly, I think, looking elsewhere is something which can happen down the track. But look, it's not a matter of saying communication and discussions and other partnerships can't form as well. It just means that I think let's get our own house in order first, and then we can start perhaps looking to other partners and other nations. And the reason also I think that's beneficial is when you're actually trying to articulate that as what are we trying to achieve with those nations, it becomes clearer. I think when you look at another country and they say, I want to join Quad right now, the question I would ask is, do you actually understand what Quad's about? Because if we're still trying to work that out in the finer detail, they won't know it at this point either. So I would also be worried when a country says, I want to commit to Quad, when the actual purpose and what we're trying to achieve policy-wise and within the region is still in that kind of developmental phase. So I'd stick with Quad as it is. Yeah.
Stick with Quad. Stick with Quad is the message. I would like to just ask Professor, or sorry, Dr. Nagao, if he has something to add to the discussion before I jump to the questions.
Yes, thank you very much about the Quad Plus. Indeed, we should not forget, we need to win the competition with China. So to win, what kind of factor is important? Popularity. When we check the number of the country in the World War I, 32 country versus 4 country. This is the number of the country who fought in the World War I. So in this case, a big number is influential to win. So World War II, 54 versus 8. In the Cold War, US-Soviet Cold War, this is competition, not the war. but 54 versus 26. Now US has 52 allies, and China has only North Korea. And so when we think about how important the popularity in the competition, Quad Plus is a very good idea because number is increased. So in this case, in my opinion, Quad Plus is welcome. More number and we will be winner. That's my opinion. Thank you very much.
So as always, Dr. Nagao has kind of bucked the trend and spoken for Quad Plus. Andy, you being a potential Quad Plus country, right? Quickly in probably 10-15 seconds, if you could tell us, right, would ASEAN would like to be part of a Quad Plus if such an opportunity did arise?
Okay. But in this case, Quad Plus is a little flexible, looks like coalition of willing. So case by case, when we need to support Vietnam, Vietnam is a democratic country, but at the same time, Vietnam is very important country. In this case, Quad should support. Sorry.
Yes.
Communist Vietnam. Communist.
That's
Vietnam.
a problem indeed. That's a problem. But Vietnam is important in this case.
Indeed.
Yes.
Again, that sort of values thing, common identity, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
Andy,
Well,
if I could bring you in.
It is interesting, to discuss about the institutional factors of, between the grouping of any countries in this region, in the Pacific region. But I do really hope that in using the game theoretical kind of perspective, I do really hope it's not gonna be a zero-sum game actually. So I wish that the Indo-Pacific area would be a battlefield for building a fractal kind of system that, a system that can prepare all the countries, the Quad member countries, also China and also ASEAN to prepare the rainy days if something happened. So they all got self-resilience, but still an open economy. And I wish that I actually don't want to wish that, but maybe in the next pandemic, maybe that's a bad case actually. The next pandemic, the next disasters, because actually Quad begins with disaster, right? It's tsunami in 2004. So I think the soul of this grouping is actually to prepare for the rainy days. Well, competition is part of the game actually, but I think the end game would be, I wish not a zero-sum game, but empower all countries in the Indo-Pacific. Dr. Shukla, thank you.
I'm just thinking, Andy, maybe it's worth making clear to the audience that ASEAN countries don't all have one view on this. Indonesia obviously has a very different view on China than Cambodia and Laos do.
I always emphasize economically speaking, as I mentioned earlier, right? So because too many, established projects like, some things like a fast train project or infrastructure project in Indonesia is actually funded by China, 60%, right? So I think to be not inclusive in this kind of geostrategic game will be a very a disaster politically, will be a disaster politically and financially for Indonesia actually, and perhaps for Vietnam, Thailand, but perhaps not for Philippines or Malaysia. I think, I'm sorry, they already kicked out China from the infrastructure project there, I think. So as always, Indonesia always play the game between, it has its own game between conflicting kind of tension in the Pacific. So it's so difficult for
Terima kasih, Pak Andi.
Thank you so much, Andy. I would like to take this opportunity to transition to a couple of audience questions. And I know that we are already 9 minutes over time. So I would request the panelists for another 10, 12 minutes of your time to just answer some of the pertinent questions that are there. The first question is from Ashish Singh. Like he's asking, are our panelists' views on the Build Back Better versus the Blue Dot, right? And the role of Quad India, the role of particularly Quad in that. So the new formulations that are coming from the Biden administration. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, I think you'd be best placed to start to probably answer this question.
Well, I think it's a great initiative. The Blue Dot network is a kind of a setup where you certify the projects are good, viability is encouraged, is identified, and build back better again is a step in the right direction. The challenge is the funding, the finances, because developmental activity requires huge amount of funds, and there is a constraint in funds. But any initiative taken in that direction is a positive initiative.
Lovely. Any other panelists would like to chime in on this question before I move on to the next? Okay. So Sravani Roy Chaudhary, she's a professor from JNU. She has a question that we also have the CPTPP and the RCEP as the economic architectures in the region, right? And interestingly, China has a presence in RCEP while India does not, and vice versa in CPTPP. So how does all these competing frameworks, if Quad tomorrow also brings in the economic angle, how do these pan out, these different competing frameworks? Any of the panelists would like to weigh in on that?
I can come in quickly just with a sentence or two. I think that the Quad is not cohesive on economic and trade issues. I don't think we are a group of free trading nations that all agree. And I think it's very clear that we don't. We can't agree to be in the same groupings, whether that's TPP or whether that's RCEP. So I don't think that's an area where we're cohesive enough to achieve much.
Okay, so we have a question from Vipasha Nath, and I don't remember, but during the discussion, right, the concept of the lovable panda versus the fire-breathing dragon came up, and that's what this question is all about. Vipasha Nath is talking about this shift or this attempt, right, to create the credible, lovable global image of China. Now, how do you see that playing on at the global stage, the motivations behind that, and do you see any hidden intentions behind it, the lovable panda image? Any one of our Ambassador Armbruster, Armbruster, sorry, my sincere apologies. I think that you would be best placed to take a shot at this one.
I'm going to shortly hand it over to Ambassador Prakash, who has something at the front of his mind, raising his finger. But I think we have to admit that in diplomacy, every country is acting in their own interest. And so if that image is something that bolsters China's objectives, then that is something that they will adopt. And even these multilateral groupings, each of our countries is doing it because we see that as a benefit for our own countries. So I wouldn't be too swayed by a public relations move like moving towards the panda. I think China has some real serious ambitions right now, and we have to not be naive about that. So I cede my time to better China experts.
Dr. Taniguchi has an interjection to make.
Thank you very much. Obviously, Panda is the best ever ambassador for Chinese soft power diplomacy. But it is an animal of Tibetans. It is a Tibetan animal. So without seizing Tibet, Panda could not have been such an agent.
Wow.
I'll come in too.
Yes.
I think it is interesting that there has been this statement about, the wolf warrior diplomacy might need to be pulled back a bit. And I think it does reflect something that's happening among Chinese elites, for what it's worth. They're concerned that the assertiveness in recent years is getting a concerted pushback. And so that, perhaps it might have been wiser to hide and bide a little bit longer rather than get the sort of response that they've been getting. Because, the big aim is national rejuvenation. That's what it's about. And you don't want anything to derail that. We had early on questions about what China thinks. And I think it's really clear China thinks the West is in decline. It sees a lot of these things like the G7 and it just says, oh, that's you being nostalgic for when you used to run things. I think it probably sees the Quad in pretty much the same way. And the question is, can we make it into something different than that?
Lovely. Thank you, Melissa. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, I think Ambassador Armbruster was very keen to hear your views on this. So if you've got anything to add on that.
I always have something to add. Now, on this, it is pretty straightforward. If the president of China wants China to be lovable, of course, China should be lovable. And in the morning, we'll get up tomorrow morning and start loving China because that's how it should be.
Yeah, I can sense the irony from miles away. Having said that, since we've brought in the Tibetan word, Taniguchi-san brought in the Tibetan word, one question that is there, and I think that we'll wrap it on that note, is that while we discuss Taiwan, while we discuss everything else about the various Spratly Islands and all the aggression of China, we seem to have forgotten 1949 and 1950 when Tibet as well as the Uyghur nation were annexed. Until today, right, their struggle kind of goes unnoticed in the world. So any thoughts on that, bringing that to the forefront, right? Does that put pressure or does that do anything to temper down the revisionist nature of China? Yes, Ambassador.
I do think that this is an area where if it's not a decline, it's sometimes a failure on the part of Western democracies to speak up more forcefully on issues like the Uyghurs, Hong Kong, in places where people need to be defended, the human rights of North Korean people, for example. I think we have to speak loudly, clearly, and consistently about the centrality of human rights in all of those areas, because that is what we stand for. That is what differentiates our democracies. And if we neglect that, I think it's a real failure and a signal of decline that we need to resist.
Professor Taniguchi wanted to come in. Let's invite him.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Yes, there should be more cohesive voice to be made from democratic nations, certainly Quad nations.
And Melissa also wanted to come in. Melissa, didn't you want to come in, or am I imagining?
I'm always happy to speak, but no, not particularly. Look, I want to challenge the group on that slightly. I agree with everything you just said, Ambassador Armbruster, and I'd say we also have to be consistent about human rights violations when they happen in Quad nations as well, when they happen in friendly nations and good nations. It's not something we weaponize against other countries. It's a common, universal aspiration that we have all signed up to. And whenever any of us, whether they're a friendly country or not, resiles from that, we should be outspoken on it.
Okay, so I believe that Dr. Nagao has something interesting to say on this point, and we'll call it the end of the panel discussion after hearing Dr. Nagao.
Thank you very much. This is unexpected. Okay, but yes, about the value-related issue, why this is important? Because indeed, the number of the democratic country is declining. In 2005, 89 country as recorded as a democratic country. but 2020, only 82. And the non-democratic country is increased from 45 to 54. If China will be the model of success, many countries will follow democratic country, where people live in the democratic countries. So we need to maintain the democratic regime as the strongest political regime. That is the reason Taiwan is important, Japan and the democratic cooperation like Quad is important. So, and we should raise a voice, because rising voice itself is part of democracy. So that's that is the reason we should gather, we should raise hand, and we should cooperate. Thank you very much. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Nagao. So on that note of raising a hand for common values, right, and not weaponizing it, as Melissa said, I would like to thank all the panelists for a wonderful discussion. It was really insightful, and also to the audience for their incisive questions. And now on that note, I would hand it back to Arpit for his closing comments. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. First of all, apologies are in order. I know I've received a message from Jan, other audience members, also on my LinkedIn and my WhatsApp, that I need to ask questions over here. I am so sorry that we could not take all of the questions. We're already way over time, but then hopefully you will engage with us in future sessions as well. This is just the beginning, and I am absolutely hopeful and a big believer of what Melissa said over here of the Christmas tree model, that this is just the beginning of what Quad is. It could mature into a true multilateral organization. Ambassador Armbruster gave some examples of that already to us. I owe a big thank you to Ambassador Vishnu Prakash and Dr. Shukla and Dr. Nagao for bringing a lot of power to an initiative, an idea that we just had as a think tank. There are a lot of good ideas floating around, but then in order to execute those ideas, you need partners who can implement them. And in addition to them, I'd also like to thank Ms. Shelley Brunswick from the Space Foundation, who's not here, and Mr. Jonathan Cummings, who, and also Justin Hartley for giving us all of the support for setting up this Quad Forum. A huge vote of thanks to Professor Taniguchi for not only taking out the time, but then staying the whole way throughout this panel, because we were absolutely worried about not overcommitting you to this panel discussions time. And Ambassador Armbruster, who took out the time to speak to us over a pre-briefing call and congratulated us many times over the great initiative that we have brought together. So thank you so much for your support and enthusiasm for this panel discussion. And Melissa, who agreed to be part of the panel almost at a last moment notice, as well as Andy. Funny thing over here is that Andy was my classmate at Cornell, and here for this panel discussion, Shashank connects me to Andy and says that, okay, I've got this great person from Indonesia, and I'd like him to be part of the panel. So Andy, thank you so much we've been planning to collaborate, and thank you so much for joining us over here today. Finally, thanks to all of the audience members over here. It is because of you, it is because of our efforts towards public diplomacy and getting some of these ideas out there in the public discourse that makes all of what we are doing relevant. So thank you so much for taking out the time and staying overtime and staying all the way, and for your questions. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.